Welcome friends to today's session of live lectures. For today's session we have with us Dr. Namita Rajput. Dr. Rajput is principal in Delhi University's Sri Aurobindo College Evening. Friends, she is associated with the work of teaching for a long time, and she is a part of this fraternity from a very long time. Friends, today's topic of discussion is environmental ethics. If you have any questions regarding this session, you may call us on our toll-free number in the last 10 minutes of this session. For that, please note our toll-free number. It is 1800-110-430. Let's welcome Dr. Rajput and let's continue with today's topic. We welcome you, Dr. Rajput, and please throw some light on environmental ethics.
Sure. Good morning, friends. The topic of today is environmental ethics. As you all know that we are in an era of global warming, wherein we have to really take care of the nature because we do not have the climate B. We do not have the planet B with us. So whatever endeavors we have to take care, we have to conserve and save the nature because nature has given us so much. So it is our prime responsibility to take care of such corporate practices which is really going to conserve and contain the environment. So with this backdrop, let me start with my lecture. The importance of environmental preservation, though not better state and corporate governance practices, cannot be overseen, given the increasing awareness among the peoples worldwide on this issue in the context of the global warming and its attending problems. The state is enjoined to play a very significant role to protect, preserve and nurture all the creatures, human and the flora and the fauna, and of course to maintain the ecological balances for the good of all mankind, and corporations have to assist the state in this endeavor. So that means it is our prime responsibility, whether we are working with the corporates or we are working with the office, whether we are in the every walk of our life. Each walk of our life demands any such endeavor which is going to really contain and sustain the environment owing to the global warming and its the associated and the attendant problems. The government worldwide are assisted by the environmental conscious, public media, consumer and environmental groups apart from the corporations. The corporations have a very specific and social responsibility to bear, since they have played a major role in the environmental degradation. While producing the goods, they have destroyed the forest, they have depleted the water resources, they have overused the replenishable resources, polluted the environment and poisoned the water. Now we have certain international protocols in this effect. What are these international protocols? They are basically on one premise that we cannot and we are not allowed to do any such activity which is commercial in nature, which is going to degrade the environment. But definitely if you see the flip side of it, if you see the dark side of it, people are always associated with something or the other because their the overall purpose is not taking care of the environment, but they are destroying the nature. Why so and how so? Because of one factor, that is greed, that is money, that is profits. So in order to have immense profits, in order to have the best future, the best future which they see is only in terms of the money. So what are they doing? They are destroying the environment, they are depleting the resources which are irreplenishable, they are polluting the environment, they are even depleting the poised water. So definitely what harm are they doing? They are definitely creating such an atmosphere in which we cannot live, we cannot sustain, and of course in order to fulfill their greed, they are putting everyone in trouble. So we have to really take care of these concerns, and these concerns are very important for us to understand that if we do not take these issues in a grave sense, the future is always dark for us. Why so? Because there are certain resources which are not replenishable. So whatever we do, we are not able to have that original position again. So they have a stake in preserving an environmental, the ecology for the prosperity. The companies have a moral, ethical, social responsibility to maintain the purity of the ecosystem and safeguard the environment. So what is this? If we all understand and if we all have at the core of our heart, yes, this is our responsibility to, really contain safe environment, to maintain that moral ethics, and we should not be engaging ourselves, we means the corporates, into such an activity which is definitely going to pollute the environment. So it is overall we have to conserve the ecology in the best manner so that we are able to take care of our present needs. Not only the present needs, we are also able to take care of the future needs also. Now, it is a well known fact that contemporary environmental problems are very, very serious. Why so? But the specific issues, the consequences, the priorities are vaguely defined and much less explained for the people to understand the implications of these problems. Now, however, there is a very clear appreciation today that ever before the environmental quality is an important desideratum in the social and economic development of the nations and of course the well-being of the people. So, if you take care of the contemporary environmental problems, the contemporary environmental problems are such, they are so serious that if you continue doing it on a very sustainable basis, definitely the earth is going to be in a big problem and the implications and the serious repercussions are going to completely jeopardize the environment. Now, coming on to the growth of consumerism. Now, what are the environmental concerns? The growth of the consumerism leading to a very high rate of consumption of the natural resources is at the heart of many environmental problems. Now, you must have seen today that we means the consumers, we have such a wide choice. We have such a good, the number of products, and it is the consumerism, that is the consumer is the king of the market. So, owing to this particular fact, the growth of the consumerism is one leading cause of the environmental problems. So, somewhere our growing needs, our basic issues relating to so much of a choice, so much of a consumerism at heart is magnifying the problem to the maximum extent. So, we as a consumer have to be an ethical consumer, we have to be an eco-consumer, and of course, the ecological concerns should be at the prime aspect in deciding of any of the product which you are taking for the consumption. Traditionally, industry has been driven by the consumer demands to produce the goods effectively and efficiently regardless of the consequences. Now, coming on to the regulations and the innovations are changing its system, but yet we do not have a solved concepts in front of us. So, we are not able to see any kind of a road of the solution because we are continuously moving on the same track, that is we want more and more. The greed is at the heart of the consumerism, and of course the innovations are also changing the system in a very, very bad manner. Consequent to it, we have lot of environmental issues which are coming up. So, we are not able to see any kind of solution path forever because people are not changing their concerns, the people are not changing their habits, and people are continuously using those products which are even not in their basic needs. Why? Because they are wanting more and more. So, all these things have to go a sea change, and basically all the consumers have to understand very nicely that yes, we have to put a check on the products which we need, and of course these things are very, very bad and leading to a very chaotic situation in the future. Now, the need to have a clean air and water, the fertile soil, biodiversity, and overall the cleaner world for the people to live or to be stressed to ensure the health of the global environment. The environmental problems thus continue to pose the challenges and the opportunities to the business as they are having for the several decades. Now, coming on to the history, a very interesting part of the lecture, that is what is the history of environmentalism. Over the last century, many activists, writers, the policy makers have debated about the environment. Since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, human activity has taken an increasing heavy toll on the natural resources. The natural balance has been distorted owing to the over dependence of the mankind on the environment for the sake of the small gains and of course the lack of foresightedness. If we develop these kind of foresightedness, that yes, if we do not change ourselves, the nature will shut its doors to ourselves. We will be having lot of global warming issues. The climates will be very shorter and severe. The sustainable conditions will not be there as far as the human inhabited is concerned. We will not be able to have a fresh air. The future generations will have more and more problems. Why? Because they will not be able to enjoy the rains. They will not be able to enjoy the nature. So all the greenery will be multiplied by zero. We have to have a very change and different lifestyle as and when we continue. So overall, if you see the the overall scenario coming on to the 50 years down the line from now, there's a lot of predictions done by the geologists that if we continue on the same lifestyle, we will not be having any sustainable lifestyle. We will not be able to live. The average age of the people would be less than 30. So we will not be able to conserve the environment, and this is what we have to take a concern and a collective thought in relation to this. So that is why there are so many overall international protocols which are coming on the way and which really are so concerned. We are having a lot of climate conventions across the globe, but the prime concern is that we have to change each and every outlook towards the environment. As far as the using of the environment is concerned, as well as the using of the resources is concerned, we have to say no to our growing needs which are not required at all. We have to develop a strong sense of foresightedness. If it is not there, of course, we are all in a very chaotic situation which is not sustainable. The inhabitant will not be able to fit to live. We will have very, very hot climate coming on. We are having the melting glaciers. So overall, there has to be the environmental concerns all the way. Now, if you talk about the United States, as early as the turn of the 20th century, the importance of the natural resource conservation heal administration. Now later, if you see the human health risk posed by the pollution raised much concerns during the 1960s, and slowly the concept of environmentalism evolved as attitudes about human impacts on air, water, forest and other aspects of the environment. Now coming on to the increasing awareness and the consequence concern, these issues were fueled by the informed public sentiments, media coverage, corporate attitudes and the government policy. The public protest on the air and water pollution led to the passage of many environmental laws by the US Congress and to the creation of the Environment Protection Agency, that is EPA, and a community-led recycling programs. Now added to this, the protest against the pollution business is not in my backyard, that is NIMBY campaign is not another example of how environmentalists have impacted the industrial activity. Now the activists have encouraged the industry to change the practices, to innovate in order to improve the environmental quality. Now coming on to the other aspect, the widespread support for the environment protection is a relatively new phenomenon. An enhanced perception of an impending crisis has caused in the recent times a spate of the law-making, technological innovation, improvisation and of course the even bureaucratic evolution. During the last 3 decades, the business have had to respond to many new regulations which have posted challenges and at the same time opened the new opportunities also. However, the interaction of the different stakeholders has brought out both the strength and the weakness of democratic decision making in a capitalistic economy. Economic implications of the environmental problems have been a key issue throughout the history of environmentalism. Michael Silverstein argues the environment and economic goals are not irreconcilable. He cites the historical evidences dating back to the Industrial Revolution, demonstrating the business and environmentalists are not inherently in conflicts that they are often perceived to be. The principles of industrial resource use and the environmental conservation, he argues, are definitely compatible in that each focuses on the sustainability. Now, while activists have done much to publicize the environmental problems, disasters such as Bhopal, we have a 3-mile island, and examine wells, and the books such as the Rachel Carson Silent Spring have also raised the public awareness on the health hazards of the pollution and the environmental degradation. This realization has resulted in an increased demand for the industry disclosure and accountability. In many cases, increased awareness, regulations, and the changed practices have resulted into improved environmental quality. However, many challenges remain unsolved. Moreover, there is a perception shift over time from the controversial activism to the cooperative problem solving many stakeholders. Environmental philosophy takes a variety of the forms and the stances, each with some merit, and also adding to our understanding of the relationship between the human beings and the environment. A fundamental aspect of the environmentalist is that the players who are involved in it are often motivated by the different philosophical approaches to the natural world. By gaining an insight into the ideological underlying the environmental movements, we can understand the arguments and stances of the players who are involved into it. The environmental philosophy is also very important since it is useful in changing the attitude towards the environment. John Bellarmine Foster in Global Ecology and the Common Good argues that only a change in the common morality will help to alter the present means of the production and the mass consumption, which will otherwise lead to ecological collapses, somewhere later. He further argues that the self-constructive levels of consumption in the developed societies can be curbed by shifting to a more holistic perception of the natural environment. The nature, according to him, should be included in the number of more community. Marcia J. Maroc and the Jering on environment philosophy and the concept of non-use value argue, and the ideas from the various environmental philosophies should be incorporated into the economic policy formulation. Now, this is all because of the economics traditionally fails to effectively measure the non-use values. Now, of course, this leads to a dilemma in that some natural resources lack is an essentially and easily measurable monetary value, but are important for the ecosystems. Now, according to them, the ideologies of the the anthropocentrism, conservation, pre-conservation, biocentric, ecoterminic, ecocentrism, deep ecology, social ecology, and ecofeminism are all the framework applicable to the relationship between the environment and, of course, the economics. Now, coming on to another issue in the environmental debates, it definitely addressed the legal rights of the nature. Then, of course, the Joel Scrooge in his article, The Rights of the Nature and the Death of the God, poses the question as to who should represent the nature in a democracy, self-appointed environmentalist or elected officials. And of course, the practical implication of the environmental philosophy in debates of a public policy are the regulations may also be a key to the natural resource conservation. Now, perhaps the most famous work in the environmental philosophy is that the Edo Leopold, who in his book A Sand Country Almanac 1948 related his ideas that radically alters the framework in which the human relates to the environment. His concerns about the environmental degradation led him to argue that the nature must be protected both legally and morally. Now, the Leopold was an expert in the natural resource management who realized the consequences when the humans are alienated from their natural surroundings. His call for the inclusion of the nature in the moral community was an argument for preserving the environment for its own sake, not simply for the human use. Now, the preservation of a healthy environment and the ecological balances is everybody's concern. To promote the environmental awareness among the people, we need to help of different stakeholders. These stakeholders are the public, the media, the environmental groups, the corporations, and of course the government. The public opinion is crucial to the resolution of the environmental issues in a democratic society. The public has the power to support the interest groups, elect and lobby officials, pay taxes, work for the companies, buy the products, and support or reject the policies. In the United States of America, many polls are conducted to determine what the public thought about the various issues, and the results were carefully monitored by the incumbent politicians. These results indicated that after a decade of being on the fringe, environmental have succeeded in making many of their points, and there is a acceptance among the populace that something must be done about the environmental problems. The effects of pro-environment public sentiments are, the evident in many business and the government sectors. The Bhushan Bahri and the Kylie Pope in their articles, the giant outmast identified the direct correlation between the public opinion and of course the environmental policy. Now they describe the Greenpeace stopped Royal Dutch Shell from the scrutiny of all the rig in the Atlantic Ocean by organizing the public protest throughout Europe. Now this pressure was such that it forced the Shell to alter its policy and of course dismantle the rig on the land at a substantial cost to the corporation. Now this is a classic example when the public pressure prompted a giant corporation to change its policy. It is not a small thing, of course, when the things are done in the public interest. So public pressures can really change the game. So this is what happened in Shell company. Because of the public pressure, because of the public opinion, because of the public pressures, it prompted a giant corporation to change its policy altogether. Now here is a perceived risk of the environmental damage. Look the precedence over the economic considerations thanks to the strong public opinion in this regard. The public perception of the environmental risk continues to be a driving force in the US politics, according to Thomas A. Now W. Miller and Edward B. Keller, health concerns are the primary motivation for the public alarm. Now in this article, what the public wants? It wants the authors to describe how specific special languages that is used to inform the public has direct effect on to the response. One of the finest example involves the use of a non-hazardous or hazardous in the description of the water side. Now coming on to another aspect, the ambiguous use of these terms can really convey an inaccurate sense of the danger in a surrounding community. Besides, the correlation between the human and the ecological health is often very poorly understood. More public education, of course, on the environmental issues required. The communication of the problems to the public must improve to build the consensus and of course the understanding on the very important vital environmental issues. Now we are coming on to another important aspect called media. Now before we come on to media and discuss, let me just give you the small recap of what we did as far as the public opinion is concerned. Now, public opinion is a very crucial aspect as far as the resolution of the environmental issues in a democratic society is concerned, because it really supports an issue, it rejects the issues, it forces the even the joint corporations to change their policies. Similar examples are given. The first I'll give you for the United States. Many polls were conducted to determine what the public thought about the various issues, and of course the results were very carefully monitored, and of course then of course they are taken up by the politicians in their own way. Now, these results indicated that after the decades of being on the fringe, environmental had succeeded in making many of their points, of course, because they are all coming from the public voices and they are all coming from the public opinions. And there is definitely an acceptance among the populace about meeting these environmental issues concerns. Similarly, we had a lot of other examples which I took for the Europe, which we took for the Shell company, which we took for the the Royal Dutch Shell company, in which the similar opinions were taken, and of course because of the pressure movements, the giant corporations, they completely and they had a sea change in the policy framework. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajput, and thank you all for joining us for this part of the session. We will take a short break and we will meet you after a break. Before going on to the break, we would like to tell you, if you have any question regarding this session, you may call us on our toll-free number. For that, please note our toll-free number, which is 1800-110-430. We'll meet you after a short break. Welcome back, friends, to today's session of live lectures. Before going on to the break, we were discussing about environmental ethics with Dr. Namita Rajput. Without doing any further late, we'll move on to Dr. Rajput for this topic. But before going on to that topic, we would like to tell you, if you have any questions regarding this session, you may call us on our toll-free number in last 10 minutes of this lecture. For that, please note our toll-free number, which is 1800-110-430. Let's welcome Dr. Rajput once again, and let's start with the topic. We welcome you once again, Dr. Rajput, and please tell us more about this topic.
Now we will be moving on to certain media aspect and the environmental ethics. You have seen that when you talk about the media these days, the negative news which is coming on takes lot of attention by the media in relation to the positive news. And we are not talking in air, we have certain empirical evidences to this effect that of course the negative news is catching more importance than the positive news. But yes, this is not the need of an hour today. The studies show that although the positive news about the environment has received considerably less attention than the negative news in the recent years, but this situation is definitely changing nowadays. Why it is changing and how it is changing? Because of the pressure tactics, because of the pressure movements, the situation is changing. Headlines may soon announce the environmental friendly deeds of the corporations, which may provide the valuable publicity to improve the competitiveness in a society that is increasingly consciousness of the environmental issues. Now, of course, this is the biggest concern these days, that people in terms, when you talk about the people, we are talking about the corporates. The corporates are slowly drifting, and moving towards the positive sense of this aspect. That is, they are trying to catch up with certain good policies, which they want to showcase to the public at large, that yes, this is what they are doing for the environment and this is how they are doing certain good deeds in order to contain, or they want to show their eco-vision in this regard, and or they want to show their consciousness towards the environmental issues. So, in relation to this and in owing to this, the media is again changing its policies. Now, the scene which was earlier there, now we have a scene which is contrary to the previous ones. Now, the positive news are catching more importance rather than the negative news, because of the increasing consciousness of the environmental issues these days by the company. So, they want to showcase, and of course, we have a very clear-cut aspect that there is a positive association of what the companies are doing, of what corporates are doing, and about their profits, and which is being caught up and catched by the media, and it is shown in the TV, etc. Now, to ensure the media needs, it provides the balanced information, which is very important for the business to play a proactive role in the information dissemination. Now, media is one channel, or media is one instrument which is the people would peep into any of the corporate, or if they want to see the policies in relation to the environmental, how sensitive they are, how proactive they are in terms of saving and conserving the environment, they see through the media. And it is a fact that with the many issues which are coming up, a lack of objectivity often would pervade the environmental journalism. So, this is definitely a very important issue these days. Many environmental advocacy groups have evolved considerably from the liberal, anti-business, anti-government periphery of the past decades, which some radical groups do remain, and many moderates, definitely they conservative groups, are cooperating with the business and of the government. The role of some groups is shifting from simply bringing the attention to the environmental issues towards working to solve the problems. These organizations are often a reliable source of the information, and they support and represent the public sentiments. The government groups, they vary greatly in their scale, they vary greatly in their scope, they vary greatly in their philosophy, and it is very difficult to discuss them as distinct identity, because all all these things are so overlapped and interlinked that we cannot have a distinct identity as far as their scale is concerned, scope is concerned, and the philosophy is concerned. Now, some of the similar major groups are Conservation International, Greenpeace, and the Environment Defense Funds. The environmental groups, they play a very pivotal and a very significant role in the environmental issues and must be taken seriously by the decision making in the business and the government. The cooperatives and the cooperation in these groups is definitely essentially in the next phase of the movement industry innovation. The environmentalists are definitely important both as a source of the information and of course as a representative of the public interest, through which these are sustainable obstacles to the cooperation, including the conflict of interest, the compliance and the size of the companies. In addition to the environmental groups, there are also the organizations that are opposed to the environmental regulations and a so-called wise use movement. The wise use movement is definitely has got a deep meaning into it. That is, whatever resources you are using, you should use them wisely with the eco-vision that they are sometimes replenishable. They are sometimes you are not able to renew them. So, we should have a policy which is concentrating, and the nucleus of that policy is a wise use movement. The Competitive Enterprise Institute, that is the CEI, it supports the free market and the limited government by opposing the most environmental status and the policies. The group frequently criticizes the EPA for using the inexact science and inefficient protective measures. Now we are coming on to the environmental groups. It is definitely important to recognize the government environmental policy is not perfect. All the stakeholders are responsible for working towards a consensus for effective decision making on these issues. The corporations have been known in the past to be traditionally unsympathetic to the environmental problems. The pollution and the degradation caused by the industry activists in the way back in 19th century or 20th century, they created many of these problems in the first place, and as a result the pressure from the environmentalist and the regulation legislation, many companies have altered their stances, their moves, and they have modified their policies as well. And they cannot ignore this pivotal and the most important issues which is proliferating and sweeping everywhere. And in fact, many firms now they work proactively to improve the environmental quality. This relatively recent phenomena continues to be, it continues to develop as the environmental issue gain the attention of more business professionals. And of course, a key shift occurring in the environmental regulations of the industry is from an emphasis of the pollution control to an emphasis of the population prevention. And with forethought and the ingenuity, the goal of the later idea is to eliminate the pollution before it is produced. By innovating the process, environmentalist encourages the corporate investment in technologies to reduce the use of the contaminants in the industry production. Now we are moving on to the corporations. There are many voluntary business initiatives that promote the pollution prevention by improving the efficiency of the production. This approach is popular because the corporations can cut cost while improving the environmental quality. The development of the corporate environmental policy has ranged from incremental changes to comply with regulations to substantially innovating the process, and it is the later formulation that we exploit by the Stephen Scamning in the UN Earth Summit way back in 1992. In many cases, it has been found that the sound environment policy can be parallel to the interest of the corporations. The shift of the corporate attitudes is a very important key to the environmentalism, and the Dow Chemical Corporation dominates and often criticized industry is a notable participant in the corporate stewardship. The consumer and the legal pressures have been important incentives for Dow to develop its environmental policy, and it is now on the top priority from its corporations to improve its environmental record. The example of the Dow serves as the evidence that the environmental concerns are very urgent, and they are approximately being included near to the top of the corporate agenda. Now in the near future, the companies that refuses to go green will be unable to survive in an environmental conscious marketplace, because there is a greenery everywhere. We have a green vision which is developing amongst the corporate also. So, each and every policy of the corporates have been scrutinized, whether they are going to go green or not. And if the policy, if they refuse to go green, of course, they will not be having any kind of a place in the market, and they will no more be a market player. So therefore, it is very vital that the corporate leaders, they learn to promote the resource prevention through reducing the waste and maximizing the resources and improving the profits also. The stance of the corporations is shifting towards being proactive stakeholders, seeking sustainable solutions. The industry has traditionally been at odds with the environmentalists, but the paradigm is definitely changing in a very big way. The holistic management of the natural resources and the necessity of the response to the public concerns are also playing a greater role in the corporate strategy. The implementation, when you talk about the government, the implementation of the effective environmental policy has been obstructed by many of the factors: inadequate scientific knowledge, budgetary deficiency, and of course the conflict of disparate interest. The electoral cycle and the public emphasis on the sound economy force environmental issues into a political arena which does not always, lend itself to the timely decision making. The EPA, for example, often had a lot of difficulty improving the environmental quality when its activities are perceived to hurt the economy. While environmental protection is a broadly supported idea, the reality of its cost is unpopular. The economic cost of the environmental regulations, when you talk about, has been criticized by the private sector, and usually the EPA is a target of reapproach. Now, when you talk about certain other issues as far as the government is concerned, the EPA has also come under attack for the costly, litigation and inefficient regulatory policy, and it has been instrumental in monitoring and polluting the emissions of the industry. The agency is still developing its role in the public policy and improving the environmental quality. Many stakeholders who advocate or oppose the environmental protection seek to influence the government. Even with the firm leadership, effective environmental policy will take time to develop in a government. The inexactness of the environmental science, the cost of the economy are the key obstacles to developing the sound environmental policy. The stakeholders definitely in the environmental issues, they play a very, very important and a significant role in the policy formulation. The government directives can prevent some of the most important environmental damage from occurring, but the large solutions are only possible when the concerned cooperation from all the actors, the partnerships at the local level, at the regional level, and at the global level may be at best for the stakeholders to participate in the efforts to resolve the environmental issues. Now, we are coming on to a very important, the topic of today's lecture, that is the future outlook on the environment. The environmentalism, if you see the conceptual framework in the 21st century, it can be characterized by the principles that will serve as the basis for a continued activism and the policy formulation. The first of the theses is partnership and integrated strategy that brings disparate interests together in a cooperative forum to resolve the environmental issues. This common sense approach is definitely proving to be a very practical and effective way to address the natural resources concerns. Now, the corporations taking this approach benefit from the knowledge and the experience of their partners. And in the second development, fundamental to the future environment is definitely in the international cooperation which is growing in response to the crisis of the global environment. The environmental issues have definitely reached the world agenda in the United Nations programs and the world conferences and the integrated agreements. Now, the third principle that has evolved as a new foundation for the environmentalism is the sustainable development, a model for conservation, which focuses on the natural resources consumption. For the economic development to be sustainable, the needs of the present must be without compromises, the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs, and this task will require a fundamental shift in the world economy to the limited natural resources consumptions and the environmental degradation. Now we are coming on to the partnerships. So there are so many ways and means and the ways we are able to conserve the environment. So we are now moving on to another concept called partnerships. The recent cooperation among the stakeholders on the environmental issues is a very promising evidence that pressing the environmental problems can be resolved. So if we join hands, and there are certain voluntary the collaborations of more than two organizations with a jointly defined agenda focused on a discrete, attainable and the potential measurable goal. The life cycle of the partnerships involved an integrated relationships among the stakeholders throughout the decisions and the implementation process. Now it is evident that both the corporate and the environmental stakeholders, they gain the benefits from the cooperation. The dominance of the business interest cannot be undermined, but of course the non-government organizations, that is the NGOs, can maintain a substantial influence in the decision-making process by understanding the goals of the corporations. Further, the evidences of the importance of the partnership is the growing practice of the corporations to seek an assistance of the NGOs to preserve the endangered species in the areas of the operations, pooling the assets of the stakeholders and the cooperation reaching for a solution. The partnerships may also be in an effective way for the government to tap the resources of expertise that exist in the environmental groups. Now we are moving on to the international issues. Many international issues are international by their nature. These include cross-boundary pollution, common area resource, economic development. Traditionally, the state sovereign and the self-interest took precedence over the resolution of the global problems. And of course, in the recent decades, if you see, an integrated world economy has emerged. It's dominated by the multinational corporations. The resulting economic interdependence of the nations fosters the cooperation in resolving the international issues. The worldwide recognition of an ecological crisis has moved to the global environment higher on the international agenda. The absence of an international government, competition with the nations, and of course the complexity of the international relationships are remaining as the obstacles to the global environmental policy. The United Nations Conference on the Environment and Sustainable Development in 1992, though not the first of its own kind, was a major breakthrough for the environmentalists. The meeting held in the Rio de Janeiro were divided into 3 levels. 1. The government leaders, 2. the corporations, and 3. the NGOs. Each group debated the issues of the social justice, property rights, North-South relations, forest principles, developments, biodiversity, responsibility, and technological transfer. While it is significant that the world leaders address the global problems such as the ozone depletion and of course the common area resources, the lack of funding remains as an obstacle to permanent solutions. The key success when you talk about of the conference was the environment because of a priority on the global agenda. Now we are on to another concept called sustainable development. A very significant concept underlying the international and domestic international policy is a sustainable development. Now, what is a sustainable development? The implication is that there are limitations to the Earth's carrying capacity in light of the present levels of technology, social organizations and the population. The evolution of the ideas about the corporate sustainability development has been substantial, of course, but the next step is to generate effective policy initiatives. Now, while it is very clear that the current economic practices are unsustainable, it is under undeniable fact basically that the developed countries have the knowledge to operate sustainably, but we do not have. When you talk about the developing countries in particular, the key will be the government and the corporations to change the practices in shifting to a more efficient model of resource use. The contradiction of the popular opinion about the sustainable development is offered by the William Nitz in the economic case for the economic and sustainable development. The author argues that sustainable practices are no more costly than the current industrial process, and that the actual barriers to change are inadequate information, training and incentives. He claims that the cleaner technologies are very competitive, and the public development, when you talk about, should attempt to stimulate the innovation rather than out of the funds for the other aspects. Now, he further argues that the organizations like the Global Environment Council, that is the GEC, they should change the manner in which they help the developing countries to focus on sustainability. Environmentalism in the year 21st century is likely to be characterized by the various efforts to implement the Sustainable Development Agenda. The international organizations such as the United Nations and the World Bank will be an integral part of the development of the effective global policy framework. The questions of financing the sustainable development technology transfer and the corporate interest need resolution of the last change is to take place. The corporations maintain a very dominant role in these issues, and of course, those they adopt a proactive stance in the environmental stewardship are likely to compete well in the world economy and in the years to come. Environmental regulations are quite often criticized as being too costly for the business, but yes, certainly protecting environment quality is very expensive task for many of the regulated industries beyond the higher cost of individual firms. However, many people argue that the level of environmental regulations hurts the country competitiveness in the world markets. Now, there are certain costs and the benefits of the environmental regulations. So, let us discuss that. Some of the economists have countered that the strict environmental regulations may actually serve to be enhancing a country's competitiveness. It is evident that the forward-thinking firms can turn environmental regulations to the advantage. They argue that the clean business practices are more efficient and therefore profitable. It is also important to realize that all the firms are affected equally by the environmental regulations, and the effect of the environmental regulations upon the economy as a whole remains very unclear. Many economists feel that the environmental regulations raise the price of the inputs, putting business at a competitive disadvantage in the world economy and hindering the growth. Whereas other argues that the forward-thinking regulations in the United States, they encourage the firms to innovate while keeping the country to be in the forefront in technology, enhancing the US competitiveness. And the Michael Porter is the leading proponent of this pro-regulation view. He outlines his major arguments is green and competitiveness. Regardless of the validity of the earlier argument, the business people should view the regulation as an opportunity to gain an advantage for their individual firms. And now we are moving on to another topic called trade and environment. Historically, the nations have had widely varying the environmental protection standards, and with the increasing recognition the natural resource degradation as a global concern, countries have now begun to negotiate agreements on the environmental issues. The first such agreement was formed in the year 1987, and however, they have reflected the growing recognition that the environmental trade and environmental protection are intrinsically linked. And of course, in the future, any firms which they want to have the international dealings, will have to take environmental issues into considerations. With these bits, I hope the concept of environmental ethics is quite clear, but there are certain more topics to be taken in the next session so that you have a complete insight of the environmental ethics and what is moving around in the contemporary world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajput, and we thank you all for joining us for this session. We would like to tell you, if you have any question or suggestions regarding this session of the lecture, you may write in to us on our mail ID. For that, please note our mail ID, which is info.cec@nic.in. We hope that you get a great insight into environmental ethics, and we will meet you again with some other topic with Dr. Rajput only, and will give you a great insight into those topics as well. Thank you for joining us for this session. We'll meet you again.